It is, again, it's so unprecedented. I mean, 4 years behind bars would mean he could be elected president and serve his entire term from a jail cell. It's a little bit incomprehensible, but again, with the appeal, he could just remain free. So we don't know. It's jarring, and we'll see what happens on July 11th.
Let's speak now to Caitlin Doornbos, Washington, D.C. reporter for the New York Post. Caitlin, good morning.
Good morning.
Very good to speak to you. So first of all then, something else that Hal said in light of this verdict was that actually the kind of charges were drummed up. These are things that could have been viewed as misdemeanors, and actually they were escalated into felony charges. Is there anything in that? Is that something we should consider, while also maintaining in our own minds that due process has happened here and jurors have found him guilty? But if we can kind of keep those two things together, is that possible?
I think that is the common narrative from the Republican side, obviously. However, this trial, it really laid out all of the evidence to prove that this really did happen, and certainly the jurors thought so as well. Before the trial happened, I believed more of that narrative was resonating more with the American public. But now, after kind of watching the trial unfold, I think more and more people are kind of seeing it for what it was. And but still, it's not a very popular case. Of all four of his criminal cases that he faces now, this was the weakest one, and yet he was convicted on all charges.
In terms of what happens next, the date has been set for sentencing, but just explain the process for us from here on out.
Yeah, sure. So July 11th, he'll return to court and he will undergo sentencing. All of his major first class felonies, he could be facing up to 4 years in prison. The rest of the charges include years of parole. Until then, he is able to go back on the campaign trail and get fired up among people. He's still free on bond, as he has been. But it will also be a time for him to really drill down. And I mean, I think this is really where we're going to see him start um, really firing up his campaign. He's got go time. At no point in his campaign where these indictments have come out has he lost any support. So I think we'll really see him getting busy before July 11th. And then he'll come back to the courtroom and the judge will hand down his sentence, depending on whether he'll get. I mean, I think the biggest question everybody's wondering right now is, will he get prison time?
Mm.
But
And that seems unlikely,
indications are
doesn't it,
really.
Caitlin?
It does. But it also will come down to his behavior.
Mm.
So throughout the court proceedings, he was getting in trouble with the judge for tweeting hateful things, speaking out against witnesses or the judge or prosecutors, et cetera, on social media. He's had a big problem with that. He says that he should have, this free voice. It's unclear right now whether or not the judge's rules for keeping him from speaking out viciously against the victims and the court and the prosecutors will continue now. But once that becomes clear, once an order comes down, that could influence what the judge hands down, because he's ticked off the judge enough times by violating these court rules.
Just then, on the kind of election process from here on out, he remains a candidate. There will be a debate, a televised debate between himself and Joe Biden before, I think, sentencing actually takes place. So that will be. It's just such an odd process of events, isn't it? That he is a convicted criminal and he'll be debating the current president. I mean, there is so
Yes.
much electorally to consider over the next few months before polling day itself.
Yes, and you know what is funny is that we've known that these trials were coming on for a year and a half, but I think if you poll the average American, everybody's a bit in shock
Yeah.
that it happened. Whether or not they're a supporter and they're shocked that it happened, or they're not a supporter and they're just shocked that this word of law actually came down and prosecuted a former president. It's such a historic moment. Um, I, to watch how it affects this election. It's a historic moment. Nothing has ever happened like this. But I think it's going to be definitely, if this wasn't already an election to watch, certainly is now.
Yeah. Caitlin, thank you so much. Really good to speak to you. Caitlin Doornbos, who's Washington, D.C. reporter for the New York Post. Times Radio, of course, is the election station, and there are months to run in the US presidential election. They will not be drama free.
US news editor Caitlin Hornick has been closely following the trial and joins us. Caitlin, I mean, this is a historic moment.
It absolutely is. The verdict is quite shocking. And I think that the biggest thing now is whether or not they will actually send Trump to jail. The prosecutor who brought the case is Alvin Bragg. He declined to reveal on Thursday whether or not he would seek a prison term for Trump. So at this point, it's still on the table. And it's also interesting that the sentencing date of July 11th is just days before the Republican National Convention, when Trump will actually be termed the presidential nominee.
So talk us through the process that happens next in terms of sentencing. What is kind of from the very worst to the very best scenario for Donald Trump? What could he be looking at?
So he faces up to 4 years in prison. That is the heaviest sentence. But he could also just face probation. So he could never see the inside of a prison cell. Um, you know, but he also will very likely appeal, which could drag on for months. So, that would mean he's free to campaign for reelection on November 5th. So, again, there's still a lot up in the air, but we will see what happens.
This changes the shape of the campaign significantly. In terms of how it's being received by voters, we know that Donald Trump has a history of using the courtroom as a campaigning strategy. Is this now, though, a step too far, which is going to be very difficult for him to do anything more than just solidify his base?
It is it is so unprecedented. Yeah, and that's exactly it. We have seen Trump use the courthouse as a campaign strategy. And of course, as we just heard in his comments yesterday after the verdict was handed down, he said the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people, and that's election day. So, it really, we don't know what this is going to mean. His supporters are so fiercely loyal and protective of him. I don't anticipate that that will change. I think most political experts have kind of said his base is his base. But it will be interesting to see what changes now going forward, now that we have this guilty verdict.
What people are surprised to learn is that if he is sentenced to jail time, he won't serve it if he's elected as president.
Yeah, it is. Again, it's so unprecedented. I mean, 4 years behind bars would mean he could be elected president and serve his entire term from a jail cell. It's a little bit incomprehensible, but again, with the appeal, he could just remain free. So we don't know. It's jarring, and we'll see what happens on July 11th.
Can you help explain what we will hear, and we have heard already from Trump supporters, is they will say this is all political. It's politically motivated. Can you help us because it seems almost impossible to divorce the kind of political narrative away from the justice process here? What are the arguments?
That is a great question. I think it really comes down to, um, the jurors had such a difficult task in re-examining the testimony from Stormy Daniels, from Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen was obviously very politically tied to Donald Trump both before and during his presidency. So it's, we'll see what the true political implications are of this conviction. This is, we've never had a criminal convict run for president or potentially be elected president. So again, for what we know now with the guilty verdict, there's still so much more to come.
I wonder what you make of what's the situation facing the jurors who had to make this decision. They all had to be unanimous. Potentially now they are under extreme scrutiny and I'm sure negative campaigning from Donald Trump and his allies.
Yes, and I think what's interesting here is that they have not publicly released the names of those jurors for their safety. So I don't anticipate that we will learn anytime soon who those 12 jurors are. But yes, absolutely, they I'm sure they already have been and will continue to be the subject of scrutiny by Donald Trump.
Caitlin, thank you very much. Caitlin Hornick, the Sun's US news editor. On that breaking, developing news overnight, we knew the jurors were deliberating. Well, if you've just joined us, Donald Trump's been convicted of fraud by a New York jury, declared him guilty on all 34 charges of falsifying business records.